Hi everyone, and welcome to the video podcast for Security Magazine, sponsored by Cyjax. Today, of course, I'm joined by Lisa Forte and Philip Ingram. And actually today we're going to talk about two really interesting subjects. The first being spheres of influence, right? And then the second being, well, how to win elections and influence people. So to kick us off, I think because we are coming on the tail of our China paper, let's talk about the Chinese sphere of influence then.
Yeah, I think one paper that I read that was really interesting that perhaps will kickstart some discussion here was around Latin America, because Latin America is really unique in the sense that it has loads of natural resources, lots of mining going on, but also actually it's a continent that essentially is having rapid technological development and investment. So it's actually a really interesting, but it has a very weak level of infrastructure typically, bad roads, no trains, etc., etc. So it offers a lot of opportunity, I think, for big superpowers to come in and extend that sphere of influence into that area, which China has identified, I think. And when I was in Peru last year, what struck me was the amount of stuff that had been put in that was all Chinese. So like a lot of the telecoms network was Chinese, the plugs, the power things on the sides of buildings, all Chinese, all written in Chinese. And there was this really interesting quote, which actually came from the African Union, I believe, where they were talking about China as an investment partner. And what they said was that the West have typically viewed these sorts of countries, the global South countries, as places to give aid, to keep the wolf from the door. And they were saying that what China does is look at a way of helping them lift themselves out of poverty and start to leverage the assets they have to make money and lift their people out of poverty. And I think that's exactly the narrative that the Chinese have very, very carefully and sneakily managed to get in. And in South America, it offers a great opportunity. China wants votes and support, right, for its projects around the world.
Yes, the projects.
The projects.
I think there's two ways of looking at spheres of influence. There's the geographic way, and I think that's really important. But we have to overlay the geographic way in the what influences that from a wider geopolitical perspective. And where I'm coming from here is, I think there are effectively three groups around the world. The first group are those that are emerging democracies who are still trying to fight and find their way in the global geopolitical sphere, and all the rest of it, are naive in what they're doing. They have elections. Some of them have got good and fair elections, others have elections just because it's for show, and there's a lot of corruption. You find a lot of that in South America, in Africa in particular, and elsewhere. And then we've got the two big spheres. We've got the what I'd call the Western sphere, and those are the countries that are driven by presidential, prime ministerial, parliamentary elections. So about a 5-year timeline in what's going on. But actually, when you look at what's happening in those democracies, it's not necessarily the election time frame that influences political decision making. It's what tomorrow morning's headline is going to be. And if Donald Trump gets into the United States, it's what this afternoon's tweet is going to be, because they become reactive rather than proactive in everything that they do. And then you've got the other sphere of influence, which is growing, and it's those countries where you've got leaders that know that they're in for life. In fact, they're in for multi-generational time periods. So we've got Xi Jinping in China, we've got Vladimir Putin, we've got the Grand Ayatollah in Iran, we've got Kim Jong-un in North Korea.
Lukashenko in Belarus.
We've got Lukashenko in Belarus. Anywhere where there's a dictatorship. And they can sit and plan in 25 years' time.
Right.
And whenever they're carrying out their activities, they can, I liken it to eating an elephant. They're eating it a tiny little nibble at a time. Whereas from a political and a geopolitical perspective, the Western countries that are having to think in tomorrow morning's headlines are suddenly going, oh, it's an elephant, and try and bite it and swallow it in one go to deal with the elephant that's there. One works, one doesn't. And this is where I think our whole democratic principles are potentially being undermined, and actually the levels of influence that you're seeing around the world, and what you describe in South America with the Chinese influence coming in and slowly but surely taking over things from a technological perspective, and then increasing economic power, and then getting into the natural resource. That's exactly what they've done across Africa.
But also the Russians, because don't forget the Russians, when the Venezuelan crisis first happened, the Russians parked fighter jets in Venezuela.
Yeah.
And there was this
That
extension.
was a bit disturbing.
It was a bit.
It was a good sales pitch.
It was a really good sales pitch, but I think the fact is that, for the Russians, Latin America and African countries are for support of the war in Ukraine.
Yep.
Perhaps selling of Russian arms, because sanctions and stuff, you need countries that are willing to buy your stuff, right?
Not
and
that Russia's got any to sell anymore.
It's not going to come from Europe. It's not going to come from, the Middle East potentially. So, those are good things. And then I think also, money. Mining rights, things like that, and we've talked about that before. That
Russia. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say there's two other influences that bring both Russia and China together, but Russia much more in this from an immediate influence perspective. The first one is the international criminal gangs and the drugs trade. The drugs coming out of South America that are aimed not just at the United States, but coming into Europe, a large proportion through the soft underbelly of Ireland, because Ireland can't defend itself and has got criminal gangs that will quite happily import and then get it out to the EU and elsewhere, has got huge political influence in what the countries of the EU are trying to do to protect against the drugs and everything else. It's a destabilizing influence. Russia is enabling that as much as they possibly can. And then we look at the hiatus that there is in the US Congress on the vote of aid to Ukraine, and that is being held up by one person, the Speaker of the House, and the Speaker of the House is linking it to the US southern border. Now, the Russians can see that, and therefore they are putting as much pressure by pushing people up from South America to the US southern border and stirring South American feeling inside the United States to create that dilemma in his mind and his principal backer's mind, Donald Trump, so that they can try and restrict the amount of aid going into Ukraine. That plays into what Russia is trying to achieve in the short term perspective. And this is where we're getting a lot of Russian influence from that perspective. China's sitting back and watching it very closely and going, okay, if I then move my chess piece on the fourth dimensional board this way, that'll set me up for the future. And that's what China's doing.
I think there's one other thing that we need to talk about and linking it into tech and cyber is also the tech companies that get utilized, right? And one of the things, Russia less so, I don't feel that Russia's tech companies are particularly all over the world. They're a little bit like, some of them definitely, but I think things like Alipay in South America is huge. Way above Apple Pay, right? Which is significant as well when you look at the sort of Chinese tech companies, American tech companies, how different countries are going, okay, we're not going to allow Google, but we'll allow whatever, and the social media platforms and pay platforms that get utilized. That's all also about extending sphere of influence, right?
And this is where the two different motivational factors are behind the two groups. China, it's economics. Those little nibbles are economic nibbles because they want economic power. So they're not going to try anything physical around the world if it's going to impact their economic growth in any way, shape or form. So Taiwan, from a physical invasion, I think is safe, whilst the West would come in and hit China hard economically. And that's the best defense that we can put in. Whereas Russia is much more nationalistic focused and much more focused on actual geopolitical influence and achieving things and trying to change the way people are thinking, to influence politics, to do everything else. So they want to try and influence what's going on in global decision making with regard to Ukraine today. With their longer term aim being the regrowth of the Soviet Union, where Vladimir Putin is the new Tsar and in charge of everything, and that's the old Soviet Union actually goes to what it really wanted to do and takes over the whole of the world.
The Brezhnev Doctrine brought to you.
I've got sort of some interesting perspectives to lay on this. So I want to zoom into South America because it's fair to say America has almost no credibility in South America anymore. This was mostly because of things in the era of the Iran-Contra affair and things like that. It's been embarrassed. It's now turning in on itself, where the issues in South America are being weaponized and politicized by two pragmatic nations. When you look at Russia, I tend to think of them being pragmatic. And I also see China is long-term pragmatic. So if Russia's short-term and China's long-term and solely sort of focused on economic pragmatism, the idealism that the Western nations, led by the United States, are putting themselves at a disadvantage.
I agree.
And so And so what we're seeing is the true waning of an American empire and a rise, at least, of a Chinese empire with a long-term strategy and a Russian empire desire, but I don't think they're in a place where they're going to achieve it anytime soon. Yeah. So when we look at this clash of Western idealism, where basically handing envelopes of cash to various governments or companies is verboten. We have laws against it here. We're up against two organizations, one which will just put more armed troops in there than we can possibly defend against, because we're still obsessed with the war on terror. And so, we lose that battle in Africa to the Russians, in terms of the Russians being able to take billions of dollars out of Africa and use it to fund their war. Mm-hmm. And then we're in a position where we can't challenge the Chinese, who will come in and essentially, I had this insight yesterday. The Chinese are looking for the equivalent of their own Chinese. They want to be able to sell their white goods, which are imitation of Western goods, at a much cheaper rate to the emerging development of a middle class in all of these countries, which, as you pointed out, they're pushing the amount of infrastructure in order to sell more phones, more generators, more solar panels.
100%.
So we got outplayed. Because I think what happened was we thought that there was sort of like a moral code.
A loyalty.
Yeah. And I don't think that exists anymore. So enter in the UN, enter in the World Trade Organization. What do you guys think? Do international organizations, do they hold any water? Are they any good?
So I think I've studied international law, I did masters, and one of the criticisms that gets leveraged against the UN is the fact that the permanent members of the Security Council have veto rights, right? So there's 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council: the UK, France, the United States, Russia, and China. And one veto by them vetoes all action, essentially, right? And that was created because ultimately these countries didn't want action taken against their projects. We'll leave it there. And so this was a way of and then the other side of the Security Council, you have then another 10 non-permanent members who are kind of selected and cycled. And I think at the moment there's like Japan, Switzerland, a bunch of others that are currently in there. And that cycles around. And one classic example, really, which happened this week, was the proposed ceasefire agreement that was hugely backed by the Arab states and put forward by, the UAE being one of them. And it was vetoed by the United States.
Yeah, nope, not going to happen.
And then so you have to question the effectiveness when one person can veto it. We've seen this happen before with Israel. The US will veto it. Something happens and Russia will veto it, or China will veto it.
But the UN is completely ineffective. And people turn around, and I hear this on a regular basis, and say, well, the UN should intervene. The UN doesn't have any troops. Right. The UN doesn't have any capability whatsoever. The UN relies on the Security Council giving a political or legal political mandate for contributing countries to give troops to go into an operation under that UN mandate.
Largely China at the moment.
But they all have a national command and control structure that can tell them what they can do and what they can't do, and what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. The UN has got no authority over anything at any stage, and this is where the permanent members of the Security Council, you have that ultimate veto piece, means that the UN will continue to be impotent for the whole of its existence, and there is no mechanism for changing that unless one of the permanent members decides to vote the fact that it should not have a veto anymore, and none of them, if you've got any common sense whatsoever, are going to do that.
Well, I think it's quite interesting because after the 20 years of success that we've had in Afghanistan, arguably a country that shouldn't be able to defend itself from the might of the Western powers did so successfully and ejected us. Now the Iraqi parliament is being influenced heavily by Iranian desires to see American troops out of the Middle East. And to be fair, for the countries that did participate in Gulf War I, Gulf War II, Afghanistan, the Iraqi adventures that went on, the war of terror, I don't think there's an appetite for a return to the Middle East anyways.
Yeah.
So we're stuck in a situation right now which is really uncomfortable for, I'm going to call it, a handful of modern Arab states with, what are the two sort of dominant powers that are emerging in the Middle East?
So the big concern by the Gulf states, so Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, Oman, is this conflict in Israel giving Iran basically becoming the dominant power of the region for two reasons. One, not hugely a massive fan of Iranians in those countries. Two, and perhaps more importantly, Iran has a history of being really problematic in the Persian Gulf and blocking the Persian Gulf, which is a massive problem. It's not so much for Oman, but definitely for the UAE, Kuwait, and the others. That's a huge, huge issue. That's a massive issue for
Well, I'm
oil
going to say,
countries.
it's so massive that they found a new set of idiots to do their dirty work as opposed to actually sailing out of their port. And they're actively supporting.
Yeah.
We saw that, and getting back a little bit to the cyber, but we will talk about cyber and elections. There was an alleged electronic warfare attack, a cyber attack on an Iranian intelligence boat that was feeding all of the intel to the Houthis who were busy launching their missiles.
Yeah.
No, and we'll have to recognise that the issue in the Middle East that's going on is a multi-century Sunni Shia civil war that's being fought out by proxy between Saudi Arabia and Iran in different countries that are the manufacturer of different empires from around the world. Over 100 years ago, whenever they drew straight lines and maps and created the countries that we name today, and therefore, until we get to the root of the Sunni Shia civil war and deal with that, then all the other little conflicts, which include Israel and everything else, are going to be ongoing. Now, bringing up things into the cyber arena, the other sphere of influence that I think we haven't discussed that's really important is data efficacy. And what we're finding with a lot of the technology that's being developed and technology that's going out is when you look at what that technology does, it gathers data. That data has to be held somewhere. And it increasingly tends to be held within the cloud. Where does that cloud sit? And that's where there's another sphere of influence. So, for example, I give a lecture where I talk about the data for the Pokemon Go game being held, and there was a specific bit in its terms and conditions being transferred to continental United States. That allowed any data that was collected from non-US citizens to be analysed by US intelligence whenever they wanted to without warrant. Bits and pieces, because there was an open warrant to do that.
Which they do.
If you look at the Chinese technology that's there, a lot of that technology is sold with cloud access for the data that it's holding. Those cloud servers are held in continental China. What people don't realise from a security perspective and all the rest of it is that then allows the Chinese government state to be sitting analysing that data that's on the servers in continental China, but it could be analysing the data that is looking for diaspora from consisting of people that China disagrees with politically, but in the country where the data was collected. So you could have your people walking down the streets of New York where you've got Chinese CCTV systems that are surveilling them. The data is being held in a server in China, and the Chinese Communist Party are sitting watching live what is going on, firing facial recognition software through all of it to identify Uyghur diaspora or other groups that they disagree with diaspora so that they can track them. And you don't know that that's happening in your country. This is where there's a sphere of influence that we're forgetting, and it fits into the cyber arena completely, where it's that data sphere of influence. And this is something that from a wider cyber perspective, we need to be really conscious of and start to take that and understand the threat it gives from a reality perspective.
Just pull this into, as we just talked about data, into elections.
Yes.
And I have a question for you, actually.
Oh, okay. All right.
So,
yeah.
2024.
Right.
Biggest year probably ever for
Big year.
elections. Big year.
Big year.
Lots of really big ones. Probably the biggest being India, maybe the United States as well. UK will be having election.
The whole of the EU?
Most of the, and countries within.
Yeah.
But there already has been a big and interesting election that's happened in February in Pakistan.
That's right.
And you wrote something, I believe, that sort of semi-predicted it, which almost makes me think perhaps you were involved. I don't know.
Yeah, so Pakistan decided.
That's classified.
Sorry.
So Pakistan decided to essentially turn off the internet for the period of their elections. This made Western media coverage really difficult to do it. It also opened up a whole host of sort of issues around, free and open communication as much as you can have in Pakistan. Let's be clear. But the fact that close to 100 people died in that election, also deeply disturbing. And again, because it wasn't available on the internet, there is almost no coverage of it in the Western media at all. And to your point, I wrote a Huffington Post article around 2015 about a theoretical order from then President Obama to suspend the internet for 24 hours. And of course, I got a kicking on that, saying that's absurd. Why would people do that? Well, maybe it's so that we can get out of that spheres of influence that we talked about, especially with the huge revelations that China spies, and China uses contractors to spy, and those contractors get grumpy. So we have a Chinese Snowden, apparently, who leaked a whole bunch of really interesting information about Chinese capabilities, which, to be fair, in of itself is kind of a footnote, but it's now confirmation about what everybody's been believing China has been doing since 2001. Like, it's now the concrete finger pointing, they're actual bad guys. In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't change anything because we already thought China was, up to nefarious
projects.
Things. Russia has been overt. I just think it's kind of interesting that in 2013, Mandiant announced APT-1 as being the first sort of here's cyber threat intelligence, and here we are, the 10-year anniversary, or almost the 11th year anniversary, and we get the revelation that China hasn't stopped spying after we called them out the first time.
Shocking.
Right? Shocking. I think going back to this, though, we see in our own country, in the UK and in other countries, increasing divisiveness, increasing dysfunctions, the amplification of scandals. Do you see this as a deliberate attempt to undermine the sort of terrible feelings of, well, my vote really won't matter anyways because it's the system and I can't change it?
100%. Those that want to influence our democratic processes are doing it. And we saw the Cambridge Analytica scandal with the last elections, where Cambridge Analytica gathering huge amounts of big data being analysed to then use political campaigns to target against individuals or groups and everything else. That was quite a few years ago. We bring in AI, generative AI now, and we bring in big data analysis. And I've written a paper on hacking your serotonin, where it looks at manipulative marketing techniques. And if anyone says, I'll never fall for manipulative marketing techniques, I'm sure everyone has got a childhood advert that they remember that triggers a feeling in their mind. That trigger of a feeling is triggering different chemical reactions in your mind, and it's what's called the feel-good quartet of different hormones and influence chemicals in your mind, your serotonin, your dopamine, your oxytocin, and your endorphins. And those control the way you think, they control your mood, they control your behavior and everything else. So you get a nice piece of music and it relaxes you, it influences the balance of those chemicals. If you see a nice visual picture that comes out, it influences the balance of those chemicals. If you see something that you think, I disagree with that, and you get angry at it, it's influencing that. The messaging that's coming at us, through our mobile devices, that's being targeted at us, and our adverts can be retargeted. You think of a new handbag. I think of new handbags frequently, and all of a sudden the Amazon adverts pop up for new handbags.
How did they know?
How did they know? But you've got.
We'll talk about this later.
Exactly. Well, we've got the big data analysis of everything that you've been doing, your friends have been doing, your friends have been saying about you, your family's been doing and saying about you, being put together when people are then beginning to retarget messaging at you, knowing exactly what fences you're sitting on. And those retargeted messages are trying to push you off one side or the other side. And we've got a level of fidelity now where you can push this to individuals, not just groups, but you can push it to groups and elsewhere. That is where the analysis of big data, and I go back to what I said about the data being held inside servers in different countries. That data can be analysed in any way those countries want to analyse that data and use to influence. And is it being used? Hell yes. And this year, 60 elections across the globe. You know, the whole of the EU elections are going on. We've got the US elections in November. We've got China, Pakistan. You mentioned Belarus has just happened. We've got the free and fair elections that are happening for President Putin in Russia on the 17th of March.
I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. It's so close. We just don't know who's going to win and by what margin. But
87%, I think he always wins by.
Yes, he does. He wants it to be 91% this year, so we'll have to see. But we've got so much influence that can happen to create further political division. Where does that political division help? Who does that help? When we talk about our previous spheres of influence, it helps those that can think in multi-generational terms, because it creates greater hiatus and problems with those that are having to react to that division, and therefore it disrupts the West. It plays into the hands of Russia, China, and elsewhere.
Lisa, Philip just laid out how it's all collected and it's analyzed. In practice, though, do you feel that this is how you get divisive opinions that then are the right breeding ground for outright conspiracy theory?
So I think there's a few ways that elections nowadays are influenced, and we've seen this, and I'll sort of go through some examples as we go through them. So AI and deepfakes, which is one of them. And I think the most recent example that we saw this was a southern state within India had an election, I believe, late last year. And during that election, on the day of the election, something really interesting happened. This deepfake video that was completely fake went completely viral, not on social media platforms, but on WhatsApp. And it spread around. It has concerned the Indian government so much that they are actually having active programs for their election this year to try and prevent that from happening, because this video, which was not at all correct, was basically pushing voters in one direction in this southern Indian state. Okay, it was a local election, but it's a sign of things to come. Yeah. And I think that's one really big problem that we're going to have, that the trust that you have in the content that you consume is no longer there. So there is no way to really, for a normal person, to understand the veracity of a claim within a video and go, yes, that's correct, or no, that's not. It's almost completely taken away.
Well, we're seeing that on a daily basis with the Israeli and Palestinian
and those are actual genuine videos that have been remarketed. They're not even deep fakes.
But I've also seen mainstream media publish videos that are quite clearly propaganda and have been invented, and they put them out as elements of the rushes that they have on the mainstream headlines.
I think that's slightly different though, because I think that comes into my second point. So obviously AI and deepfakes being one big problem for elections across the board. The second one being what we would call fake news in whatever category that is, whether that's propaganda, whether that's a video of a kid dying that wasn't where you say it is, whatever it is. And one of the ways we've seen that play out quite interestingly, just to quickly touch upon this, was the Tucker Carlson interview of Vladimir Putin. Yeah. This is classic, great, this isn't deepfake. No. This is a genuine interview that has happened with an ulterior motive behind it. Now also, what I thought was really odd about all of that was when Putin came out and then endorsed Biden. Which I was like, really? I mean, if this is, are we playing so overt it's covert, or what? What is this?
Biden's old enough to remember the Cold War. Okay.
No. Can he remember?
Well, okay. But I mean, yeah, that was bizarro land.
Yeah, it was. So I think we've got that category of stuff as well happening, and then we've got the social media. Now, one really interesting development that I think might shift things a little bit is Meta's new policy, which is coming out, which is that they're going to block all news on all their platforms. They will no longer be news being consumed on those platforms, which I do think could shift things, but it probably shift it into WhatsApp and Telegram, which we're seeing a lot of. But I do think maybe that's the direction some of these platforms are going in, instead of trying to moderate election content, just ban it, essentially,
and then it's someone else's problem. Sorry.
And then the final one is the overt kind of influence, which is hacking electoral systems. Actually,
And that was raised by one of our lovely subscribers.
It was.
To us. Yeah. So
what are your thoughts on that?
Well, so first of all, I don't believe that the 2016 election had any hacking. There's been multiple defamation cases. There's been evidence, and then there was it Chris Krebs who investigated as at the time head of CISA and found no evidence to suggest this. And when there was no evidence, if your position is being refuted, you go completely bizarre, and you suggest that the encrypted backdoors are based on a private key that was held by Hugo Chavez that would, in order to enable remote access into the election system, which I don't believe any of the election systems were actually connected to the internet. So how did that work?
But
exactly.
So we've got a solution in the UK to the US electoral problem with the hacking of the electoral machines and all the rest of it. You follow the UK process, which cannot be hacked in any way, shape, or form because it's a piece of paper and a 2B pencil.
Yeah.
And I've yet to see a 2B pencil being hacked. So if you go back to the traditional methods, it can't be hacked from an electronic perspective. But it's that wider manipulation. It's hacking the person that's putting the X with the 2B pencil. That's the bit that concerns me most.
And the idea that there's massive voter fraud, right? Again, no actual proof, multiple court cases. I believe there was over 40 pieces of accusation in the courts in all of the states of the United States, and not one had any tangible evidence or went any further than being dismissed.
I come from Northern Ireland, and there's an old saying in Northern Ireland when it comes to elections: vote early, vote often. And not that many years ago, there were busloads of people being stopped with voting cards, and those voting cards were for everyone that was in the local cemetery.
Yeah.
They weren't people that were alive and should have been voting, and therefore it is an issue that there is with our democratic principles. And one of the political parties in Northern Ireland had this process called personation. And if you ever want to read up on personation, read the great book Thatcher's Spy by a guy called Willie Carson, because he was in charge of personation for the party that he was in, and describes it very well indeed. So there is that wider influence and voter fraud that goes on in different countries. And I think whilst that's there, you'll still get the accusations. Is it that significant? It could be.
I think there's so much to play for this year, though, for the big powers. There's so much to play for. India, absolutely enormous election. It's going to have huge implications for Russia, huge. India is basically keeping their heads above water, essentially, isn't it, from an economic sanctions perspective?
Yeah, and it's sort of on the fence because it's trying to play both the Chinese game, the Russian game, and still entertain the West in some of its ideals.
Totally.
Despite having somewhat of a negative experience with British colonialism.
Yes. So we've got that. Obviously, the US election, Trump potentially, you'll have pulling out of NATO. I don't know who that would benefit. Can't think of anyone in particular at this moment, but someone.
Along the border regions?
Somewhere along the border regions, possibly. Also, Ukraine funding, again, not sure who that would benefit, but this particular individual. Trump-China policy runs completely counter to that. China's interest in Trump winning, I would say, is probably pretty low because Trump was not a friend of Xi Jinping for the most part.
No. They didn't have a warm relationship like the one he had with the leader of North Korea.
So what might happen is we might get to see who has better influence campaigns, Russia or China.
Whether Russia or China, we're all trying to...
America being the playground.
America is the proxy in this situation.
Yeah, unbelievable.
So that could be an interesting one.
I hadn't thought of that. That'd be fascinating. Yeah, we'll watch it out. And of course, we've got India elections are April.
Yeah.
So we'll look at that. You're just after the Russian elections.
We've got Russia in March. We've got Iran in March as well.
Yeah.
Hotly contested.
Yeah, again.
Hotly contested one. And then we've also got the North Korean parliament, which I didn't even realise had elections, but does. And that is also going to be held this year.
Yeah, there's 112% turnout and 115% vote for
their leader.
The grand dear leader.
Yes. I want to throw this one sort of hypothesis out about elections. It's because if the overall narrative of post-COVID era, although some people argue that we're not actually post-COVID, we're in a COVID denial stage, but because I've got friends that are telling me that they've now got COVID, and it's like, what, 2021 called, and people are still suffering from this. But sidebar, the point that I'm trying to say is it appears that the situation amongst many countries from an economic and political stability process it's starting to fall apart. And the amplification of various government scandals and the ineffectiveness potentially of both the EU Parliament and other international organizations, it's giving, I think, a false sense of, well, we have to be in it for ourselves.
Yes.
Altruism is dead. And that means, do you guys see a lot of countries that we took as sort of like beacons maybe of democracy not burning brightly, but moving into a far right?
Yes.
Like nationalism being the priority.
Slovakia is a really good example of this. So Slovakia looks very much like it's going to elect the pro-Russian leader.
That's disconcerting.
It is. We've seen, quite a disconcerting, I'd say, leap towards the Russian side from a couple of countries. Slovakia being one, Hungary definitely being another one.
Stirring up problems in Bosnia.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing. Then you've seen a lurch to the right. Italy elected what is a very far-right president, even for Italy.
Netherlands.
The Netherlands has seen that. The UK. I think the discussions about the future leader of the Tory party, someone said if Nigel Farage was polling really high, and he's neither a member of the Tory party nor a beacon of
of democracy.
We'll just leave that there. And so I think the thing is, when you have polarization of society on issues, that actually lends itself to algorithmic kind of influence on lots of platforms, because it's then very easy to put people into pens. And this middle group is largely the group that people are interested in, actually, because that is who can be swung one way or another. You're not going to swing someone who's incredibly left-wing to the right. It's never going to happen. You're never going to be able to achieve that. So they have two strategies, and when you look at what Russia has done, Russia employs something that they call active measures, which is about basically this sort of influence campaign, right? And one of the ways they've done that is identify this middle group who are maybe more undecided or could go either way. That's one way to target them towards whichever candidate you want. The other thing that you want to do, which you do simultaneously, is what they call demobilization of the voters in the other group. So if we take the US as an example, in order to get Trump to win, we need to swing the people who are undecided towards Trump, but we also need to convince the people who would otherwise vote Democrat that Biden is not worth voting for, and just to not go and turn up at the polls.
That's right, yeah.
And that's the way you swing it. So I think the more polarized you are, the easier that is to identify those groups.
And the other thing that makes it easier is, I think, our politics has changed from a politics of substance and debate to a politics of sound bites.
Definitely.
And the sound bites are the way our politicians are doing it, because there's no substance behind it. The politicians themselves are putting sound bites out to try and influence people's thinking in the way they're going. Therefore, it is by its very fact disinformation. They're not telling the whole truth.
And
they're trying to influence.
Fighting.
And we're seeing that on social media. That makes it so much easier for those countries that want to manipulate, because all they have to do is, instead of manipulating in-depth newspaper articles and television interviews and all the rest of it, they just have to influence the soundbite and influence the headline. Well, that's what they're doing.
And then follow those divisive individuals and use a lot of bot capability to amplify a message that's already being put out there by a citizen of the country, right? So actually,
we're seeing that in Ireland at the moment. You're seeing that in Ireland with the first Sinn Féin leader of or First Minister of the Assembly of Northern Ireland, and they're turning around and saying that this is a clear path to United Ireland. And that's being amplified so much on social media. When you look at the electoral reality behind it, the Good Friday Agreement turned around and says there has to be a majority of the voting population of Northern Ireland that vote for United Ireland. Voting population, registered voters, 1.36 million. All of the parties that would support United Ireland put together at the last local elections, and they statistically tend to bring out a much higher percentage of voters at local elections, and because of the parties that they support, there was only 335,000. That's over 1 million missing that's in there. It's only 26%. To get another 24%, 25% to get the 51% majority. That's not anywhere close to the conditions being set for a vote in United Ireland. But that's not what you're seeing on social media. That's not what you're seeing from all of the bots. And this is where this amplification comes in and actually is undermining our whole democratic process, because people recognize that you can influence through a soundbite. You don't have to inform, you just have to influence.
This is the problem with virality, right? And NATO wrote a really interesting piece on this, which I thought was brilliant. And they talked about virality from the perspective that if you tweet, right, and then Phil and I share that, and then all of our followers share that again, very quickly, that one post that you've put out has gone everywhere.
Right.
Millions of people. It's completely out of control. And the problem with, as NATO was identifying, the problem with virality is that something can be put out and it can spread faster than you can catch up with it, right? That's one of the problems with it. So one of the suggestions they actually made was that actually borrowed an idea from the financial services and the trading industry, the stockbroking industry. So when you have a stock that plummets, what happens is the responsible authority, so we'll say the London Stock Exchange here, can actually pause that. So you can't
They can
sell.
suspend trading.
They can suspend trading. There are rules around it. Essentially, with virality, they were sort of looking at the idea of maybe pausing when you post something, pausing for 10 minutes. So if I reshare it, that takes 10 minutes to show on the platform. So you're actually slowing the spread of that piece of information, which I thought was a really interesting idea but then it doesn't suit the social media platforms.
It doesn't.
Because they need content creation.
They want content. And they want
and
more eyeballs.
And the immediacy of the news cycle that there is now, because everything is all about who got it out first. It's not about who's got it completely accurate.
Or accurate at all. I mean, toothbrushes.
Yeah.
That was, and just to give our listeners and our viewers some context, there was an announcement that a toothbrush botnet had been created, and that it was responsible for what's called denial of service attacks, or being able to flood. There was no actual details of it.
It was a thought experiment, wasn't it?
Right, absolutely. It was a thought experiment, which then was picked up by the media, amplified. There were some great quotes from the firewall vendor, Fortinet. And then all of a sudden it took on a complete life of its own, and now it exists in memes for forevermore. We're going to wrap this up now. I think we've gone around the world several times. Just as sort of a quick hit from you, Lisa. How do we navigate the level of stupidity that we're going to see, and disinformation and all that?
I think for people who are having an election in their country this year, make sure that information that completely fits your narrative, more so than anything else, you treat with caution. And I think that's our blind spot from my perspective. Something that plays into exactly what I think is exactly where I'm going to be the most blind to misinformation. So that's what I would recommend. Make sure you're reading lots of different sources. Read sources from different countries. Don't just limit it to your own country. That's where the propaganda is going to be the greatest.
Read Le Monde.
Yeah, or DW, or whatever. But, I think we've got to start taking responsibility for this ourselves.
Yeah,
and
I'd amplify that and say, automatically assume that what's being fed to you is wrong and fake, and then try and prove it right through multiple sources. Don't prove it right through your own personal opinion, because you think that fits my bias.
Exactly, yeah.
Because that's what people want you to do. But automatically assume that what you're being told is incorrect, whether it's from politicians or whether it's from anywhere else. It's incorrect first and foremost.
Like the glorious Russian supermarkets that have trolleys with not pound coins, rubles, 10 ruble coins.
10 ruble coins, yes. It's
Never seen it anywhere.
So innovative, yes.
No.
So to sum up,
thanks, Tucker.
Caring is perhaps not sharing.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Caring is not sharing.
That's us.